The blood trickled down Zachary Quinn's stubbled face as he lay sprawled in the dirt of Agua Caliente, Arizona Territory, 1878. His prized Palomino stallion, Thunder, trotted nervously several yards away, spooked by the gunfire that had just erupted on the dusty Main Street. Zachary's vision blurred as he tried to focus on the retreating figures of the Hollister gang, the outlaws who'd ambushed him, and left him for dead after recognizing him as the bounty hunter who'd been trailing them for weeks across 3 territories. "Don't move," a gentle voice commanded as cool fingers pressed against his wounded shoulder. "You'll only make the bleeding worse." Zachary squinted up at the figure blocking the harsh afternoon sun. A woman with auburn hair tucked beneath a practical bonnet knelt beside him, her green eyes assessing his injuries with a calm that seemed out of place amid the chaos of moments before. "Who?" he started, but she cut him off. "Penelope Hayes," she answered, already tearing a strip of fabric from her petticoat. "Town doctor's daughter, though he's 3 days' ride from here attending to the miners in Silver Creek." She pressed the makeshift bandage against his shoulder. "The bullet went through clean, you're lucky." "Lucky isn't the word I'd use," Zachary groaned, attempting to sit up despite the searing pain. His eyes darted to the horizon where the Hollister gang had disappeared. 3 months of tracking gone. "I need my horse." "You need stitches and rest," Penelope countered, helping him to sit despite her protests. "Your horse is right there, and he's not going anywhere." The townsfolk who had scattered during the shooting began to emerge cautiously from doorways and alleyways, keeping their distance from the wounded stranger, and the doctor's daughter tending to him in the middle of the street. "Miss Hayes," Sheriff Morton called, approaching with his hand resting on his holster. "Is this man one of the Hollister boys?" Zachary laughed bitterly, wincing at the pain it caused. "I'm the one trying to bring them in. Name's Zachary Quinn. I have papers in my saddlebag." The sheriff nodded, still wary. "The bounty hunter heard you might be coming this way, didn't expect you to arrive horizontal." "Neither did I," Zachary muttered, his eyes finding his horse again. "I need to go after them. They're headed for the border." Penelope's grip tightened on his good arm. "You're not going anywhere except to my father's clinic." The determination in her eyes reminded Zachary of his younger sister, stubborn, unwavering, and impossible to argue with. He glanced around at the growing crowd of onlookers, calculating his chances of continuing his pursuit in his current condition. The answer was clear. "None. Fine," he conceded. "But just long enough to get patched up. They've got a 2-hour head start already." With surprising strength, Penelope helped him to his feet, steadying him as the world tilted dangerously. "Sheriff, could you bring his horse over? And perhaps help me get him to the clinic?" Morton hesitated, then nodded, approaching Thunder with caution. The stallion eyed him nervously, backing away until Zachary whistled a low, distinctive pattern. The horse's ears perked up, and he allowed the sheriff to take his reins. "Loyal beast," Morton commented, leading the horse closer. "More loyal than most men I've known," Zachary replied, leaning heavily against Penelope as they took halting steps toward the clinic at the end of the street. The next hour passed in a haze of pain as Penelope cleaned and stitched his shoulder wound with practiced hands, explaining that she'd been assisting her father since she was 12 years old. Zachary remained silent throughout most of the procedure, studying her face as she worked. She couldn't have been more than 22 or 23, but her eyes held the wisdom of someone who had seen far more than her years suggested. "Why are you in Agua Caliente?" he asked finally, as she tied off the last stitch. "This isn't exactly a thriving metropolis." Penelope smiled slightly, cutting the thread with small silver scissors. "My father came here 5 years ago when the town was nothing but a few tents around the hot springs. They needed a doctor, and he needed somewhere to start fresh after my mother died." She placed a clean bandage over his wound. "I came because he's all the family I have left," Zachary nodded, understanding the pull of family obligations all too well. "The town seems lucky to have you both." "We manage," she said simply, turning to wash her hands in a basin of water. "Now you should rest, at least until morning." "I told you I can't. The Hollisters have been terrorizing this territory for 2 years, Penelope interrupted, drying her hands on a towel. "Another day won't matter, Besides, you'll never catch them if you bleed to death in the desert. Zachary opened his mouth to argue, then closed it. She was right, and they both knew it. First light, he compromised. I leave at first light. Penelope nodded, seemingly satisfied with this concession. I'll check on your horse and have some food sent over from the hotel. Do you need anything else? He shook his head, suddenly aware of how exhausted he felt. Just some peace and quiet to plan my next move. You'll have it, she promised, gathering her medical supplies. Though I should warn you, in a town this small, a stranger with a gun tends to be the most interesting thing to happen all month. Expect visitors. True to her word, Zachary had barely settled into the clinic's single recovery bed when the first of Agua Caliente's curious citizens arrived, bearing gifts of food and barely disguised questions about his encounter with the notorious Hollister gang, Mrs. Abernathy, the hotel proprietor's wife, brought a tray laden with stew, fresh bread, and coffee. For strength, she insisted, placing it beside his bed. My herald says you're that bounty hunter from up north, the one who brought in the Dawson brothers last year. Zachary nodded curtly, hoping his lack of enthusiasm would discourage further conversation. It didn't. Those Hollister boys killed my nephew's partner over in Tucson, she continued, smoothing her apron. Shot him right in the back while he was closing up their mercantile. Never even took a dime, just did it for sport, from what they say. That sounds like them, Zachary agreed grimly. He tracked the Hollisters long enough to know their pattern. They didn't just rob, they enjoyed the violence that accompanied their crimes. It was what made them particularly dangerous, and what had made Zachary so determined to bring them to justice. After Mrs. Abernathy left, there was a steady stream of visitors. The blacksmith offering to check his horse's shoes, the general store owner wondering if he needed ammunition, and eventually Sheriff Morton returning with his retrieved saddlebags. Verified your papers, Morton said, placing the bags at the foot of the bed. $500 each for the Hollister boys, dead or alive. That's a mighty tempting sum. Not worth dying for, Zachary replied, pushing himself up against the pillows, but worth seeing justice done. Morton studied him for a moment, his weathered face giving away little. Miss Hayes says you're planning to ride out at dawn. That's right. Might be interested in some company, Morton offered, adjusting his belt. Those boys shot up my town, frightened my people. I take that personally. Zachary considered the offer. Morton looked to be in his 50s, but he carried himself like a man who knew his business. Still, Zachary preferred working alone. Partners complicated things, slowed him down, created liabilities. I appreciate the offer, Sheriff, but you work alone, Morton finished for him with a knowing nod. Figured as much. Well, the offer stands if you change your mind. He tipped his hat and headed for the door. Oh, and Quinn, Miss Hayes, she's well respected in this town. Her father's saved more lives than anyone can count. People here are protective of her. Zachary raised an eyebrow. Is that a warning, Sheriff? Morton smiled slightly. Just an observation. Rest up, bounty hunter. Those Hollisters won't catch themselves. As evening fell, the stream of visitors finally subsided, and Zachary found himself alone with his thoughts and the dull throbbing of his shoulder. He was reviewing his maps by lamplight, tracing the most likely route the Hollisters would take toward the Mexican border, when Penelope returned. She carried a tray with fresh bandages and a steaming mug that filled the room with the scent of herbs. How's the patient? She asked, setting the tray on the small table beside his bed. Ready to be on his way, Zachary replied, folding his map. Penelope smiled, picking up the mug. Drink this. It'll help with the pain and help you sleep. Zachary eyed the concoction suspiciously. What's in it? Nothing that will keep you from leaving at dawn, she assured him. Just some herbs my father uses for patients with pain. Willow bark, valerian root, a touch of honey. He accepted the mug cautiously, taking a small sip. It was bitter despite the honey, but not unpleasant. You've had a lot of practice at this, he observed. Tending wounded men, more than I'd like, she admitted, sitting in the chair beside his bed. Though usually it's miners with crushed limbs or cowboys with broken bones from being thrown, gunshot wounds are rarer. Lucky you, he said dryly, taking another sip. Indeed. She watched him for a moment, her expression thoughtful. May I ask why you're so determined to catch these men? The bounty. Zachary considered deflecting the question as he usually did when people pried into his motivations. Something in her direct gaze, however, made him reconsider. The money helps, he acknowledged. But no, that's not why. He set the mug down, gathering his thoughts. 3 years ago, the Hollisters robbed a bank in my hometown in Colorado. They killed 4 people that day, including my brother-in-law, left my sister a widow with 2 young children. Understanding dawned in Penelope's eyes. I'm sorry. Don't be. I'm not telling you this for sympathy, Zachary said firmly. I'm telling you because you asked a fair question and deserved an honest answer. The law couldn't find them, couldn't even track them properly, so I learned how. And now you hunt men for a living, she concluded. Only the ones who deserve it, he corrected. Men who have decided the law doesn't apply to them. Men who take what isn't theirs, lives included, without a second thought. Penelope nodded, standing to check his bandage. Noble work in its way. Nothing noble about it, Zachary countered. Just necessary. Her fingers were gentle as she lifted the edge of the bandage, examining the wound beneath. Healing well already, she noted. You're strong, stubborn, my sister would say. That earned him a genuine smile, one that transformed her serious face and made her look even younger than he'd first thought. I imagine she knows you best. Too well, he agreed, surprised by how easy the conversation felt. Usually, he kept people at arm's length, especially in the towns he passed through during his hunts. Attachments were dangerous in his line of work. Yet here he was, sharing details about his family with a woman he'd known less than a day. Penelope replaced the bandage and gathered her supplies. Finish your tea and get some rest, Mr. Quinn. Dawn comes early in the desert. Zachary, he found himself saying, if you're going to save my life and listen to me talk about my sister, you might as well use my given name. She paused at the door, considering him with those perceptive green eyes. Very well, Zachary. Sleep well. He did sleep, better than he had in months, lulled by the herbal tea and the quiet safety of the clinic. When he woke, the sky outside was just beginning to lighten with the first pale hints of dawn. His shoulder ached, but the sharp pain of the previous day had dulled to a manageable throb. Zachary sat up cautiously, testing his strength. He could ride. It wouldn't be comfortable, but he'd endured worse. He dressed quickly, grateful for the clean shirt someone had left folded at the foot of his bed, then gathered his belongings and stepped out into the main room of the clinic. To his surprise, Penelope was already there, stoking a small fire in the stove. She looked up at his entrance, unsurprised. I thought you might try to sneak away without saying goodbye, she said, straightening. There's coffee and biscuits ready. I wasn't sneaking, Zachary protested, though that had indeed been his intention. Just didn't want to wake you. A thoughtful lie, she observed with a small smile. Come, eat something before you go. I've already checked on your horse. He's been fed and watered. Zachary hesitated, then set his saddlebags down and took a seat at the small table where she'd laid out a simple breakfast. The coffee was strong and the biscuits fresh, reminding him that he hadn't eaten properly in days. Thank you, he said after his second biscuit, genuinely grateful. For all of this, I'm not used to such hospitality. People tend to help those who help themselves, Penelope replied, pouring him more coffee. You strike me as someone who rarely asks for assistance. Never needed to, he said automatically, then corrected himself, or perhaps never wanted to. Penelope studied him over the rim of her cup. There's no shame in needing others, you know. Even the most self-reliant person sometimes requires a helping hand. Before Zachary could respond, the clinic door opened, and Sheriff Morton stepped in, already fully dressed and armed for the day. Quinn, he greeted with a nod. Glad to see you up and about. Just wanted to let you know that I received a telegraph late last night. The Hollisters were spotted crossing through Dry Creek Canyon, heading south as expected. Zachary stood immediately. How many hours ago? About 18 now, Morton said. If you push hard, you might catch them before they reach the border. I need to go, Zachary said, draining his coffee cup. Thank you for the information, Sheriff. Morton nodded. I've arranged for some supplies for your journey. They're with your horse at the livery. Zachary looked at the sheriff with new appreciation. That's very generous. Like I said, those boys shot up my town. I want them caught. Morton touched his hat and headed back out. Good hunting, Quinn. Zachary turned to Penelope, suddenly awkward. I should be on my way. What do I owe you for the treatment and lodging? She waved his question away. Nothing, just do what you set out to do, bring those men to justice. He reached for his saddlebags, slinging them over his good shoulder. That's my intention. Penelope walked him to the door, then surprised him by handing him a small leather pouch. Herbs for your wound. Make a tea with them each night. It will help prevent infection and ease the pain. Their fingers brushed as he took the pouch, and Zachary was struck by an unexpected reluctance to leave. It was foolish. He had a job to do, men to track, justice to deliver. Yet something about Penelope Hayes made him wish, just for a moment, that his life allowed for more than fleeting encounters in small towns. Thank you, Penelope, he said finally. I won't forget your kindness. She smiled, though there was something wistful in her expression. Safe travels, Zachary Quinn. The livery stable was just coming to life when Zachary arrived. The stable boy, a lanky youth of perhaps 16, was already preparing Thunder, securing the supplies the sheriff had promised. Morning, mister, the boy greeted, tightening the cinch on the saddle. Sheriff said you'd be leaving at first light. Horses ready to go. Zachary checked the saddle and supplies, finding everything in order. He was about to mount when a movement at the stable entrance caught his eye. Penelope stood there, watching him, a determined expression on her face. Is there something else? He asked, puzzled by her appearance. She stepped forward, holding out a folded piece of paper. A map, she explained. There's a shortcut through the mountains that might help you intercept the Hollisters before they reach the border. It's not on most maps, but the local Apache use it regularly. Zachary took the paper, opening it to reveal a carefully drawn map with annotations in neat handwriting. How do you know about this route? My father treats everyone who needs help, including the Apache, she said simply. They've shown us many things about this land in return. He studied the map, quickly recognizing its value. If accurate, it could save him half a day's ride at least. This could make all the difference, he acknowledged, tucking it safely into his vest pocket. Thank you. Penelope nodded, stepping back. Godspeed, Mr. Quinn. With a final nod of thanks, Zachary mounted Thunder, adjusting his position to accommodate his injured shoulder. He guided the horse out of the stable and onto the main street, already mentally plotting his course using the new information Penelope had provided. The town of Agua Caliente was just coming to life as he rode through, with shopkeepers opening their doors and early risers heading to the small cafe for breakfast. A few people called out greetings or wishes for good luck, having apparently heard about his mission to capture the Hollisters. As he reached the edge of town, Zachary glanced back one last time, half expecting to see Penelope Hayes still watching his departure. But the street behind him was empty save for the normal bustle of a town beginning its day. Turning his face toward the distant mountains, Zachary urged Thunder into a canter, leaving Agua Caliente and its unexpected hospitality behind. He had outlaws to catch, and time was not on his side. The desert landscape stretched before him, the rising sun casting long shadows across the rugged terrain. According to Penelope's map, he would need to follow the main trail south for several hours before cutting east toward a hidden mountain pass. If he maintained a steady pace, he might intercept the Hollisters by nightfall. For hours, Zachary rode in solitude, his thoughts alternating between planning his approach to capturing the Hollisters and replaying his brief encounters with Penelope Hayes. There had been something refreshing about her directness, her lack of pretense. In his line of work, Zachary met many types of people, but few who seemed as genuinely concerned for others' welfare without expecting anything in return. By midday, the sun beat down mercilessly, and Zachary paused to rest Thunder in the shade of a rocky outcropping. As he sipped sparingly from his canteen, he reviewed Penelope's map again, confirming he was still on course. The shortcut would soon take him up into the foothills where the temperatures would be more forgiving. He was about to mount up again when the distant sound of hoofbeats caught his attention. Instinctively, Zachary led Thunder deeper into the shadows of the rocks, his hand moving to the revolver at his hip. The approaching rider seemed to be following the same trail he had been, coming from the direction of Agua Caliente. Drawing his pistol, Zachary positioned himself with a clear view of the trail, prepared for trouble. The Hollisters had allies throughout the territory, and it wouldn't be the first time he'd been followed by someone looking to warn them of his pursuit. The rider came into view, and Zachary felt his jaw tighten in disbelief. Atop a sturdy brown mare, dressed in practical riding clothes with her auburn hair now braided and tucked beneath a wide-brimmed hat, rode Penelope Hayes. He stepped out from his hiding place, holstering his weapon. "What in God's name are you doing out here?" he demanded as she reined in her horse. Penelope appeared completely unsurprised to see him. "Following you," she stated matter-of-factly, or more accurately, following the same trail to the same destination. "Turn around and go back to town," Zachary ordered, his voice hard. "This isn't some pleasure ride, Penelope. I'm tracking dangerous men who wouldn't think twice about putting a bullet in you just for being in the wrong place." She dismounted gracefully, leading her horse to the same shaded area where Thunder rested. "I'm well aware of the dangers, Zachary, but I'm not turning back. This is madness," he insisted, stepping closer. "You're a doctor's daughter, not a bounty hunter." "I'm a trained physician in my own right," she corrected him, untying a canteen from her saddle. "My father sent me to medical school in Boston. I completed my training last year." The revelation surprised him, though it explained her confidence in treating his wound. "That doesn't change the fact that you have no business chasing outlaws." Penelope took a drink from her canteen before responding. "I'm not chasing outlaws. I'm going to meet my father. He sent word that he needs assistance with the miners in Silver Creek. Several have come down with a fever." She raised an eyebrow at his skeptical expression. "The route I showed you happens to be the fastest way there. It's not my fault we're traveling in the same direction." Zachary ran a hand through his hair in frustration. "And you just happened to leave town right after I did." "I was planning to leave today regardless," she insisted, though something in her eyes told him there was more to the story than she was sharing. "The timing is merely coincidental." He didn't believe her for a second, but arguing further seemed pointless. "Fine. We'll ride together until the trail forks towards Silver Creek. But you'll follow my instructions without question, understand? If I tell you to hide, you hide. If I tell you to ride away, you don't look back." Penelope nodded, seemingly satisfied with this compromise. "Agreed. Though I should check your wound before we continue. The desert heat can accelerate infection." "My shoulder's fine," he said dismissively, turning to Mount Thunder. "We've wasted enough time. If we want to reach the mountain pass by sundown, we need to keep moving." To his surprise, Penelope didn't argue. She simply mounted her mare and fell in beside him as they continued along the trail. For nearly an hour they rode in silence, Zachary still irritated by her presence and the complication it added to his mission. Finally, curiosity got the better of him. "Why did you really follow me, Penelope? And don't tell me it's just about visiting your father." She was quiet for so long that he thought she might not answer. When she finally spoke, her voice was soft but resolute. 6 months ago, the Hollister gang came through a small settlement called White River, about 50 miles east of Agua Caliente. They robbed the general store and killed the owner when he tried to stop them." She paused, her hands tightening on the reins. "His daughter was there. She tried to help her father, and Luke Hollister shot her too, left her for dead." Zachary felt a cold weight settling in his stomach, beginning to understand. "You knew them," Penelope nodded. "Martha Jensen was my friend from school. We trained together in Boston. She survived, barely, but she'll never walk again." Her green eyes met his, filled with a determination that matched his own. "So you see, Zachary, I have just as much reason to want the Hollisters brought to justice as you do." The revelation changed things, though Zachary was reluctant to admit it. Her motivation was personal, just like his, and he couldn't fault her for wanting to see justice done for her friend. Still, the idea of Penelope being anywhere near the Hollisters filled him with dread. "I understand why you feel the need to be involved," he conceded after a moment. "But tracking and capturing men like the Hollisters is dangerous work, even for someone with experience. You could get yourself killed." "I'm not planning to confront them," she assured him. "I just need to be there when they're caught." I need to see it with my own eyes to tell Martha that the men who hurt her have answered for their crimes." Zachary considered her words. Part of him wanted to insist that she turn back, to keep her safe from the violence that always seemed to follow the Hollisters. Another part, however, understood her need for closure, for witnessing justice firsthand. "We'll continue together," he decided finally. "But when we get close, you stay back. You watch from a distance. I won't risk your life, Penelope. That's non-negotiable." She studied him for a moment, then nodded. "Agreed." As they continued their journey, the landscape gradually changed, the flat desert giving way to rolling hills and eventually the rocky foothills of the mountains. The air grew cooler as they gained elevation, providing welcome relief from the earlier heat. Zachary found himself impressed by Penelope's riding skills and endurance. She kept pace with him without complaint, even as the terrain became more challenging. Occasionally, she would point out plants along the trail, naming those with medicinal properties and explaining their uses. "That one," she said, indicating a small flowering shrub as they rode through a narrow valley, "is excellent for treating fever. The Apache taught my father how to prepare it as a tea." "You seem to have good relations with the Apache," Zachary observed. "That's unusual in these parts." Penelope smiled slightly. "My father believes that healing transcends the boundaries people create between themselves. When he first came to the territory, he treated a chief's son who had been badly injured in a hunting accident. Since then, there's been a mutual respect." "Must make life interesting," Zachary commented. "It does," she agreed. "I've learned as much about medicine from them as I did in medical school, though in different ways." She glanced at him curiously. "What about you? Before you became a bounty hunter, what did you do?" The question caught him off guard. Few people asked about his life before he started tracking criminals. "I was a marshal in a small town in Colorado," he admitted. "Before that, I fought in the war." "Which side?" she asked without judgment. "Union," he replied. "Enlisted in '63 when I was 18. Spent 2 years fighting for a cause I barely understood at the time." Penelope nodded thoughtfully. "And after the war, drifted for a while. Worked as a ranch hand, then as a deputy in a few different towns before settling in Colorado." He shifted in his saddle, uncomfortable with discussing his past. "Became marshal there, thought I might stay, then the Hollisters came through, and everything changed," she finished for him, understanding in her voice. "Everything," he agreed quietly. The conversation lapsed into a companionable silence as they approached the entrance to the mountain pass. According to Penelope's map, the narrow trail would lead them through the mountains and emerge almost directly in the path the Hollisters would likely take toward the border. "We should rest the horses before attempting the pass," Zachary suggested, noting the sun's position in the sky. "We've got about 3 hours of daylight left. If we push through, we might reach the other side by nightfall." Penelope agreed, and they found a small clearing beside a spring-fed stream where the horses could drink and graze, while they ate a simple meal of jerky and hardtack from their provisions. As they sat in the dappled shade of a cottonwood tree, Zachary found himself studying Penelope's profile. There was a quiet strength about her that he admired, a resilience that seemed to run deeper than her refined education and gentle manner might suggest. "Tell me about your friend," he said suddenly. "The one who was shot." Penelope looked surprised by his interest but answered readily. "Martha was brilliant, top of our class in Boston. She had a gift for diagnosis that amazed even our professors. She could look at a patient and see things others missed." A fond smile touched her lips at the memory. She returned to Arizona to help her father run their store after her mother died, but she still practiced medicine when needed. The settlement was too small for a full-time doctor. "And now?" Zachary asked gently. "Now she lives with her aunt in Tucson," Penelope said, her smile fading. "She still practices in her way, consulting on difficult cases, teaching others what she knows. But her dreams of having her own practice, of traveling to treat those in need." She trailed off, shaking her head. "The Hollisters took that from her." Zachary nodded, understanding all too well how the actions of violent men could forever alter the course of innocent lives. "I'm sorry." "As am I," she replied. Though Martha herself rarely complains, She says she's fortunate to be alive, to still have her mind in her hands. Penelope looked at him directly. That's why I need to see them brought to justice, Zachary. Not for vengeance, but for Martha to know that what happened to her mattered, that the men responsible didn't simply get away with it. I understand, he said, and he truly did. In his years of tracking criminals, he'd learned that justice wasn't just about punishment, it was about acknowledgement. About society declaring that certain actions would not be tolerated, certain harms would not go unanswered. They finished their meal in silence, each lost in their own thoughts as the afternoon shadows lengthened. Finally, Zachary rose, checking the position of the sun. We should move on if we want to clear the pass before dark, he said, gathering their belongings. The trail gets treacherous in places, not somewhere we want to be at night. Penelope nodded, rising to help him prepare the horses. As she tightened the cinch on her mare's saddle, Zachary noticed her glance toward the mountains with a hint of apprehension. Having second thoughts, he asked. She shook her head firmly. No, just respecting the journey ahead. They mounted and continued toward the pass, the trail gradually narrowing as they entered the mountains proper. Steep rock walls rose on either side, creating a natural corridor that wound its way through the range. In some places, the path was barely wide enough for their horses to walk single file. Stay close, Zachary instructed, taking the lead. This area is known for rock slides. Penelope followed without comment, her mare picking its way carefully over the uneven ground. The air grew cooler as they climbed higher, the sun's warmth diminished by the towering rocks surrounding them. They had been traveling through the pass for perhaps an hour when Zachary held up his hand, signaling for Penelope to stop. He dismounted quietly, motioning for her to do the same. What is it? She whispered, joining him. Tracks, he said, pointing to marks in the dusty trail. Fresh, several horses passed this way not more than 2 hours ago. Penelope's eyes widened. The Hollisters? Zachary knelt to examine the tracks more closely. 5 horses could be. Or could be miners or travelers using this pass. He traced one of the hoofprints with his finger. One of the horses is carrying extra weight, possibly supplies, or stolen goods. Standing, he looked ahead down the narrow pass. We need to be more cautious from here. If it is them, and they've realized this route is faster, they might have stopped to rest somewhere ahead. What do you want to do? Penelope asked, her voice steady despite the potential danger. Zachary considered their options. We continue, but slowly and quietly. If we do encounter them, you stay back. No heroics. She nodded in agreement, and they remounted, proceeding at a walking pace to minimize the sound of their approach. The tension was palpable as they moved deeper into the pass, every sense alert for signs of the men they pursued. The sun had dipped behind the western mountains, casting long shadows through the pass, when they heard the first echoes of voices ahead. Zachary immediately signaled for a halt, gesturing for Penelope to dismount and lead her horse off the trail into a small recess in the rock wall. Stay here, he whispered, securing Thunder's reins to a stunted juniper growing from a crack in the rocks. I'm going to scout ahead on foot. Be careful, Penelope urged, her hand briefly touching his arm. Zachary nodded, drawing his pistol as he moved forward, staying close to the rock wall where the shadows were deepest. The voices grew clearer as he approached a bend in the pass, men laughing, the clink of bottles, the unmistakable sound of a campfire crackling. Carefully, he peered around the rock formation. In a small clearing where the pass widened briefly, 5 men had made camp for the night. Their horses were tethered nearby, and saddlebags bulged with what Zachary suspected were the proceeds of their latest robbery. He recognized them immediately. The Hollister brothers Luke, Matthew, and John were gathered around the fire, passing a bottle between them. Their 2 companions, whose names Zachary knew to be Dalton and Fisher, stood guard at opposite ends of the clearing. Moving back silently, Zachary returned to where Penelope waited, her expression anxious. It's them, he confirmed in a whisper. All 5. They've made camp for the night in a clearing about 100 yards ahead. Penelope's face paled slightly, but her voice remained steady. What will you do? Wait until they're settled for the night, Zachary decided. Most likely they'll drink themselves to sleep. Dalton and Fisher are keeping watch, but they're careless. When the time is right, I'll move in. Alone, against 5 men, Penelope shook her head. That's suicide, Zachary. I've faced worse odds, he assured her, though in truth, the situation was far from ideal. His injured shoulder limited his mobility, and while he was confident in his skills, taking on 5 armed men alone was undeniably risky. Penelope seemed to read his thoughts. At least wait until morning, she suggested. They'll be hungover, slower to react. You'll have the advantage of daylight. It was a sensible suggestion, but Zachary hesitated. If we wait, they might move on before dawn. This might be our best chance. Or it might be how you get yourself killed, she countered, her green eyes intense in the fading light. What good is justice for Martha or your sister if you're dead? The blunt assessment gave him pause. She was right, his desire to end this pursuit quickly was clouding his judgment. A night approach would be dangerous under the best circumstances. With his injury and against 5 opponents, it bordered on reckless. We'll wait, he conceded finally. Find somewhere to make camp further back down the trail, out of sight and hearing. Approach at first light. Relief flashed across Penelope's face. A wise decision, I think. They led their horses quietly back down the trail until they found a small, sheltered alcove formed by a rockslide long ago. It offered protection from view and from the wind that had begun to pick up as night fell in earnest. We can't risk a fire, Zachary said as they unsaddled the horses. It'll get cold tonight up here in the mountains. Penelope nodded, retrieving a thick woolen blanket from her saddlebag. I came prepared. They arranged a simple camp, securing the horses and laying out their bedrolls side by side for warmth. As darkness enveloped them completely, the temperature dropped rapidly, just as Zachary had warned. Sitting with their backs against the rock wall, they shared a cold meal of jerky and dried fruit, washing it down with water from their canteens. Despite the circumstances, Zachary found there was something comforting about Penelope's presence, a steadying influence that helped him focus his thoughts. You should try to sleep, he suggested as they finished eating. Tomorrow will come early, and who knows what it will bring. Penelope drew her blanket closer around her shoulders, looking up at the narrow strip of star-filled sky visible between the rock walls of the pass. I'm not sure I could sleep now, knowing they're so close. Try anyway, he advised. I'll keep watch for a while. She studied his face in the dim starlight. And your shoulder, how is it holding up? Well enough, he answered truthfully. The day's ride had taxed his injury, but the pain remained manageable. Your stitching is holding. Let me check it just to be sure, she insisted, already moving closer. Infection can set in quickly. Too tired to argue, Zachary allowed her to examine his shoulder by the faint light of a small pocket lamp she produced from her bag. Her touch was clinical but gentle as she unwrapped the bandage and inspected the wound. No signs of infection, she pronounced after a moment. But it's strained from riding. You should take some of the herbs I gave you. Later, he promised, after you've rested. Penelope rewrapped his shoulder with fresh bandages, her face close enough that he could see the dusting of freckles across her nose, nearly invisible in daylight. There was something disarming about her proximity, about the care with which she tended to him despite the danger they faced. Thank you, he said quietly when she'd finished. Not just for this, but for the map, for understanding why this matters. She met his gaze, something unreadable flickering in her eyes. We all have our reasons for the paths we choose, Zachary. Mine led me here just as yours did. The simplicity of the statement struck him. How many times had he convinced himself that his path was a solitary one, that the burden of justice he carried allowed no room for connections, for understanding. Yet here was Penelope Hayes, a woman of education and healing, choosing to face danger for reasons that mirrored his own. Get some rest, he said again, more gently this time. I'll wake you if anything changes. Penelope nodded, settling back into her bedroll. Wake me in a few hours. You need rest too if you're to face them tomorrow. I will, he agreed, though he had no intention of sleeping that night. The Hollisters were too close, the risk too great. As Penelope drifted into sleep, Zachary maintained his vigil, listening to the night sounds of the mountains and planning his approach for the morning. The Hollisters had eluded capture for too long. Tomorrow, one way or another, their streak of violence would end. The night passed slowly, marked only by the movement of stars across the narrow slice of sky and the occasional distant cry of a hunting owl. Zachary remained alert, checking periodically on the sleeping form of Penelope beside him. Despite his intention to let her sleep through the night, when the moon reached its zenith, he gently touched her shoulder. "Penelope," he whispered, "I need to rest for a while. Can you keep watch?" She woke immediately, fully alert in a way that suggested she hadn't been deeply asleep. "Of course, how long was I out?" "A few hours," he said, settling back against the rock wall. "Wake me before first light." She nodded, pulling her blanket tighter around her shoulders as she took up his position overlooking their small camp. "Sleep well, Zachary." He closed his eyes, expecting sleep to elude him as it often did before confrontations like the one awaiting him. To his surprise, exhaustion claimed him quickly, drawing him into a deep, dreamless rest. When Penelope woke him, the sky had just begun to lighten in the east, a pale glow that barely penetrated the shadows of the mountain pass. "Any movement?" he asked immediately, sitting up. "Nothing," she reported. "No sounds from their camp." Zachary nodded, rising to check on Thunder and prepare for what was to come. They worked in efficient silence, gathering their belongings and readying the horses, speaking only when necessary. As the light strengthened, Zachary outlined his plan. "I'll approach on foot. The clearing is surrounded by rock formations that provide cover. I'll try to get close enough to assess their positions before making a move." "And what should I do?" Penelope asked. "Stay here with the horses," he instructed firmly. "If you hear gunfire, be ready to ride either to assist me if I'm successful or to flee if I'm not." She looked as though she wanted to argue but instead nodded in agreement. "Be careful, Zachary. These men have nothing to lose." "Which makes them dangerous," he acknowledged, checking his pistol one last time. "But also predictable." Before leaving, he hesitated, then reached into his saddlebag and withdrew a small Derringer pistol, offering it to Penelope. "Just in case," he said quietly. "Do you know how to use it?" She accepted the weapon, her expression grim. "Yes, my father made sure of that when we moved to the territory." With a final nod, Zachary moved silently up the trail toward the Hollisters' camp, staying close to the rock walls where shadows still lingered in the early morning light. As he neared the bend in the pass, he slowed his pace, listening intently for sounds of movement ahead. The clearing was quiet as he peered cautiously around the rocks. The campfire had burned down to embers, and 5 bedrolls were arranged around it. Zachary scanned the area carefully, counting only 4 sleeping forms. One was missing. A prickle of unease ran down his spine. Where was the 5th man? His eyes darted to the horses, still tethered where he had seen them the previous evening. All 5 were present, which meant whoever was absent hadn't gone far. Moving back slightly, Zachary reconsidered his approach. With 1 man unaccounted for, a direct confrontation was even riskier. He needed to locate the missing outlaw before making his move. Circling wide around the clearing, using the scattered boulders for cover, Zachary searched for signs of the 5th man. He was halfway around when he spotted a figure perched on a rocky ledge above the camp. Dalton, the youngest of the Hollister gang, apparently serving as a lookout while the others slept. The discovery complicated matters. From his elevated position, Dalton had a clear view of the entire clearing and much of the surrounding area. Any approach would be spotted, triggering an alarm that would wake the others. Zachary considered his options. He could try to take out Dalton silently with a well-placed shot, but the sound might still wake the camp. Alternatively, he could wait, hoping that Dalton would eventually be relieved of his watch and return to the camp, providing a better opportunity. As he deliberated, movement in the camp caught his attention. One of the sleeping figures was stirring Luke Hollister, the leader and most dangerous of the brothers. If Luke woke and roused the others, Zachary's element of surprise would be lost completely. Decision made, Zachary took careful aim at Dalton. A clean shot now was better than facing all 5 awake and alert. He steadied his breathing, ignoring the dull throb in his injured shoulder, and squeezed the trigger. The shot echoed through the pass as Dalton tumbled from his perch, dead before he hit the ground. Instantly, the camp erupted into chaos, the remaining outlaws scrambling for weapons as they woke. Zachary fired again, catching Matthew Hollister in the chest as he rose from his bedroll. The remaining 3 men scattered, diving for cover behind rocks and saddles, returning fire blindly toward the source of the shots. Bullets pinged off the rocks around Zachary as he changed position, moving quickly to a new vantage point. John Hollister made a dash for the horses, and Zachary took him down with a shot to the leg, sending him sprawling in the dirt. "Quinn," Luke Hollister's voice bellowed from behind a boulder. "We know it's you, lawman." Zachary didn't respond, using the distraction to edge closer to a position that would give him a clear shot at Luke's hiding place. "You're outnumbered, Quinn," Luke continued. "Even with your fancy shooting, you can't take all of us." "2 down already," Zachary called back, purposely misleading about John's condition. "Care to make it 3, Luke?" A volley of gunfire was the only response, bullets splintering the rocks near Zachary's head. He ducked lower, waiting for a pause in the shooting. When it came, he rolled to a new position and fired twice in quick succession. One bullet found its mark, striking Fisher in the shoulder as he attempted to reach a fallen rifle. The outlaw howled in pain but managed to scramble back to cover. The standoff continued for several tense minutes, with sporadic exchanges of gunfire as each side tried to gain an advantage. Zachary knew he couldn't maintain the siege indefinitely. He was outnumbered, and despite his initial success, the remaining outlaws were well armed and desperate. His opportunity came when John Hollister, wounded but still dangerous, attempted to crawl toward a saddlebag containing additional ammunition. Zachary's shot caught him in the chest, ending his movement permanently. "John's dead, Luke," Zachary called out after confirming the outlaw wasn't moving. "It's just you and Fisher now. Surrender and I'll bring you in alive." "Go to hell, Quinn," Luke shouted back, his voice tight with rage. "You killed my brothers. There's no jail waiting for me now." Zachary had expected this response. Luke Hollister had never been one to surrender, even when cornered. "Your choice," he replied grimly, "but Fisher might feel differently." A tense silence followed, broken only by the pained breathing of the wounded Fisher. Zachary waited, conserving his ammunition and energy. "Fisher," Luke's voice came again, lower this time but still audible in the quiet of the morning. "Draw his fire, I'll flank him." Zachary smiled grimly at the poorly concealed plan. Moving carefully to a new position, he prepared for their desperate attempt. It came moments later, Fisher emerging from cover, firing rapidly if inaccurately in Zachary's general direction, while Luke made a break for the rocks to Zachary's left. It was exactly what Zachary had anticipated. He ignored Fisher's wild shots, focusing instead on Luke's running form. His first shot missed, kicking up dust at Luke's heels. His second found its mark, striking the outlaw in the side and spinning him to the ground. Fisher, seeing his last ally fall, dropped his weapon immediately. "Don't shoot," he cried, raising his hands despite his wounded shoulder. "I surrender." "For God's sake, don't shoot. Throw out your gun and step into the clearing," Zachary ordered, keeping his pistol trained on the surrendering man. Fisher complied, kicking his weapon away and stumbling into the open with his hands raised. Zachary approached cautiously, never taking his eyes off the outlaw. "On your knees," he commanded, and Fisher obeyed, sinking down with a groan of pain. Retrieving a length of rope from one of the Hollister's saddlebags, Zachary bound Fisher's hands securely behind his back before turning his attention to Luke, who lay motionless where he had fallen. Approaching with caution, gun still raised, Zachary discovered that Luke Hollister was alive but badly wounded, the bullet having torn through his side. The outlaw's eyes burned with hatred as Zachary stood over him. "Finish it, Quinn," Luke spat, blood staining his teeth. "You've wanted this for years." "You're not dying today, Hollister," Zachary replied coldly. "You're going to stand trial for what you did to my brother-in-law, to Martha Jensen, and to all your other victims. The law will decide your punishment." Luke laughed, a wet, gurgling sound that ended in a cough. "Always the righteous lawman, aren't you? Even when you're hunting men like an animal." Ignoring the taunt, Zachary tore a strip of cloth from Luke's own bedroll and roughly bandaged the wound to slow the bleeding. "You'll live long enough to see the inside of a courtroom," he promised, binding the outlaw's hands despite his injuries. "I'll make sure of it." With both surviving outlaws secured, Zachary quickly checked the bodies of the others to confirm they were indeed dead. The entire confrontation had lasted less than 15 minutes, but to Zachary, it had felt like hours. Only then did he call out, "Penelope, it's over. You can come up now." Within moments, she appeared at the edge of the clearing, leading both their horses. Her face was pale but composed as she surveyed the aftermath of the shootout. "Are you hurt?" she asked immediately, her eyes scanning him for injuries. "No," he assured her, "but Luke Hollister needs medical attention if he's to stand trial." Penelope nodded, tying the horses to a nearby juniper before approaching the wounded outlaw. Despite the circumstances, her physician's training took over, and she knelt beside Luke to examine his wound. "He's lost a lot of blood," she observed clinically, "but the bullet passed through clean. With proper care, he'll survive." Luke Hollister's eyes widened as he recognized her. "You're Hayes' daughter," he said, surprise momentarily overriding his pain. "The doctor from Agua Caliente." "I am," Penelope confirmed, continuing her examination without emotion. "What are you doing here?" Luke demanded, confusion evident in his face. Penelope met his gaze directly. "Do you remember Martha Jensen, the woman you shot in White River 6 months ago?" Recognition, then wariness flashed across Luke's features. "What about her?" "She was my friend," Penelope said simply, applying pressure to his wound with clinical detachment. "She survived, but she'll never walk again." Luke had the decency to look away, though whether from shame or simply to avoid her accusing eyes, Zachary couldn't tell. "I'm not here for revenge, Mr. Hollister," Penelope continued, her voice steady. "I'm here to make sure you face justice for what you've done, and right now that means keeping you alive." The outlaw said nothing more as she worked to stabilize his wound, using supplies from her medical bag. When she had finished, she turned to Fisher, treating his shoulder wound with the same professional care. "They'll both survive the journey back to Agua Caliente," she announced when she had finished, "though it won't be comfortable for them." Zachary nodded, impressed by her composure in the face of men who had caused so much suffering. "We'll need to use their horses to transport them. Can you help me secure them for the ride?" Together, they arranged the captive outlaws on their own horses, binding them to their saddles to prevent escape attempts. The bodies of the other 3 men were wrapped in blankets and secured across the remaining horses. "Not how I expected this to end," Zachary admitted as they prepared to depart. "I was ready to face all 5 alone." "A foolish plan," Penelope remarked, though there was no judgment in her tone, "but it worked out in the end." He looked at her curiously. "You don't seem disturbed by what happened here." Penelope finished securing a bandage around Fisher's shoulder before responding. "I've seen death before, Zachary. In the war hospitals during my training, in mining accidents, in childbirth. Violence is never easy to witness, but justice is necessary." She glanced at Luke Hollister, who sat slumped in his saddle. "These men chose their path. Now they'll face the consequences." As they led the somber procession back through the mountain pass, Zachary found himself reflecting on Penelope's words. In his years of tracking criminals, he had occasionally questioned whether his pursuit of justice had become something darker, revenge, perhaps, or a way to channel his own anger at a world that had taken so much from those he loved. Penelope Hayes, with her steady hands and clear-eyed perspective, reminded him of the difference. Justice wasn't about satisfaction or vengeance. It was about restoration, about balance. About ensuring that actions had consequences, not just for punishment's sake, but to maintain the social fabric that kept communities like Agua Caliente functioning in a harsh and unforgiving land. They traveled slowly due to the wounded outlaws, making camp as the sun began to set. After securing their prisoners for the night, Zachary and Penelope shared a modest meal, the first real food they'd had since the confrontation. "What will you do after you deliver them to the authorities?" Penelope asked as they sat beside a small fire, the captive outlaws secured a short distance away. Zachary considered the question. For 3 years, his life had been defined by the pursuit of the Hollisters. With that mission now complete, the future seemed suddenly undefined, a blank canvas he wasn't sure how to fill. "Return to Colorado, I suppose," he said finally. Let my sister know it's done after that. He shrugged. There's always another bounty. Another criminal who thinks they're beyond the law's reach. Penelope studied him over the flickering flames. Is that what you want, to continue hunting men? It's what I'm good at, he replied, avoiding the real question. Not many skills a former soldier and marshal can put to use these days. I think you underestimate yourself, she said quietly. You have intelligence, determination, a sense of justice. Those qualities are valuable in many walks of life. Zachary smiled faintly. Are you suggesting I consider a new profession, Dr. Hayes? I'm suggesting you consider what you want, now that your quest for justice is fulfilled, she clarified. Vengeance can consume a person, Zachary, so can purpose when it's singular and unyielding. Her words struck closer to home than he cared to admit. The pursuit of the Hollisters had indeed consumed him, becoming the focus around which his entire existence revolved. Without it, what remained? What about you? He asked, turning the question back on her. Will you stay in Agua Caliente, practicing medicine with your father? Penelope poked at the fire with a stick, sending sparks dancing into the night air. For now. Though I've been considering opening a proper hospital there, the town is growing, and with the mines expanding, there's increasing need for medical care. Ambitious, Zachary commented, genuinely impressed. Necessary, she corrected. The territory is changing, Zachary. The railroad will reach us within a few years. More settlers arrive every month. The days of lawless frontier are numbered, whether men like the Hollisters want to accept it or not. He nodded thoughtfully. She was right, of course. The West he had known when he first arrived after the war was already giving way to something more ordered, more civilized. Towns like Agua Caliente were no longer just waypoints for drifters and fortune seekers. They were becoming communities with their own identities, their own futures. Perhaps, he said slowly, the idea forming as he spoke, there might be a place for someone with my experience in a growing town. Someone who knows how to maintain order without stifling the freedom that brought people west in the first place. Penelope's eyes brightened with interest. Are you considering settling down, Mr. Quinn? Just thinking aloud, he demurred, though the seed had been planted. It's been a long time since I called anywhere home. Their conversation was interrupted by a groan from Luke Hollister, who had shifted in his bonds and aggravated his wound. Penelope immediately rose to check on him, her duty as a physician overriding any personal feelings about the outlaw. Zachary watched as she competently readdressed Luke's wound, offering him water despite his sullen silence. Her capacity for compassion, even toward those who had caused such harm, was remarkable. When she returned to the fire, Zachary had made a decision. When we reach Agua Caliente, he said, I'd like to speak with the town council about their need for a sheriff. If Morton is interested in retiring, that is. Penelope's smile was worth any uncertainty he felt about the prospect. I think that's an excellent idea, Zachary. The town would be fortunate to have someone with your experience. The journey back to Agua Caliente took 2 days, during which Luke Hollister's conditions stabilized under Penelope's care. Fisher remained subdued, apparently resigned to his fate now that the Hollister gang had been decimated. As they approached the town, riders came out to meet them, Sheriff Morton at the lead, accompanied by several deputies and townsmen. Quinn, Morton called in greeting, his weathered face breaking into a rare smile as he took in the prisoners. By God, you did it. With some help, Zachary acknowledged, nodding toward Penelope, who rode beside him. Morton raised an eyebrow but made no comment about her presence. The whole town's been waiting for word. Telegraph came through from Silver Creek yesterday that you might be heading back this way with prisoners. These 2 need jail cells, Zachary said, indicating Luke and Fisher. And a continued doctor's care if they're to stand trial. We've got cells waiting, Morton assured him, signaling his deputies to take charge of the prisoners. And Doc Hayes returned yesterday from Silver Creek. He'll see to their medical needs. The procession entered Agua Caliente to find much of the town gathered in the main street, curious to see the infamous Hollisters brought to justice. Word of their capture had clearly spread quickly, transforming what should have been a simple prisoner transfer into something of a spectacle. Doctor Hayes pushed through the crowd as they neared the jail, his expression a mixture of professional interest and paternal concern as he spotted his daughter among the returning party. "Penelope," he greeted, helping her down from her horse, "when I heard you'd gone after these men." He shook his head, words failing him. "I'm fine, father," she assured him. "But these men need medical attention if they're to stand trial." Dr. Hayes nodded, switching immediately to his professional demeanor as he examined Luke Hollister's wound. "Clean work," he commented, glancing at his daughter. "Your stitching has improved." "I had a good teacher," she replied with a small smile. While the Hayes attended to the prisoners, Zachary found himself surrounded by grateful townspeople, many offering thanks and congratulations for bringing in the men who had terrorized their community. The attention made him uncomfortable, but he accepted it graciously, understanding their need to celebrate this small victory over lawlessness. Sheriff Morton eventually dispersed the crowd, insisting that the prisoners needed rest and the town could celebrate properly another time. As the street cleared, he turned to Zachary with a considering look. "Join me for a drink at the hotel," he invited. "I'd like to hear how you managed to bring in the Hollisters with only one casualty on your side." His eyes flicked briefly to Zachary's bandaged shoulder. The hotel's small saloon was quiet at this early hour, allowing the men to talk freely. Zachary recounted the pursuit and confrontation, giving Penelope full credit for her role in treating his wound and providing the crucial map that had allowed them to intercept the Hollisters. Morton listened without interruption, nursing a glass of whiskey as Zachary spoke. When the tale was complete, he sat back, a thoughtful expression on his face. "You know," he said after a moment, "I've been sheriff in this town for 8 years. Came here when it was nothing but a watering hole with delusions of grandeur." He glanced around the now respectable hotel saloon. "Times are changing, town's growing, new businesses opening every month." "I noticed," Zachary agreed, wondering where the conversation was heading. Morton leaned forward, lowering his voice slightly. "My joints don't take to the cold like they used to. Been thinking it might be time to hand over the badge to someone younger, someone with experience handling the kind of trouble that follows money and opportunity." Zachary studied the older man, realizing this wasn't a casual observation but a deliberate opening. "Someone like me, you mean?" Morton smiled, lines crinkling around his eyes. "The thought had crossed my mind. Town council's been after me to find a successor before I retire." "Your name came up even before you brought in the Hollisters." The coincidence of the offer, coming so soon after his conversation with Penelope, wasn't lost on Zachary. "I'd need to think about it," he said, though in truth, the idea appealed to him more than he'd expected. "I've been on the move for a long time." "No rush," Morton assured him, draining his glass. "The offer stands. Talk it over with Miss Hayes. I have a feeling her opinion might matter to you." Before Zachary could respond to the perceptive comment, the saloon door opened, and Penelope herself entered, looking tired but satisfied. "The prisoners are stable," she announced, joining them at the table. "Father says they'll both recover sufficiently to stand trial." "Good news," Morton nodded, standing. "If you'll excuse me, I should check on my deputies, make sure our guests are properly secured." With a knowing glance between Zachary and Penelope, he departed, leaving them alone at the table. "Sheriff Morton offered me a job," Zachary said once they were alone, watching Penelope's reaction carefully. Her eyes widened slightly, a smile playing at the corners of her mouth. "Did he now? And what did you say?" "That I'd think about it," Zachary replied, turning his glass between his fingers. "It would mean staying in Agua Caliente, putting down roots." "Is that something you want?" Penelope asked, echoing their conversation from days before. Zachary considered the question seriously. For years, he had avoided attachments, convinced that his pursuit of justice required complete freedom of movement, freedom from ties that might hold him back. But the prospect of remaining in Agua Caliente, of building something permanent, no longer seemed like a constraint. Instead, it felt like a possibility, one that included the remarkable woman sitting across from him. "I think it might be," he admitted. "Though I'd need a reason to stay beyond just the badge." Penelope held his gaze, understanding passing between them. "And have you found such a reason?" "I believe I have," Zachary said softly, though I'm not entirely sure she would welcome my decision to remain. A faint blush colored Penelope's cheeks, but her voice remained steady. I think she would welcome it very much, Zachary, if you're asking. The moment stretched between them, filled with unspoken possibilities. Before either could say more, however, the saloon door burst open and Dr. Hayes entered, looking harried. Penelope, he called, not yet noticing Zachary. Luke Hollister is running a fever. I need your assistance. She rose immediately, duty overriding the intimacy of the moment. I'll come right away. To Zachary, she added quietly, we'll continue this conversation later. He nodded, watching as she hurried after her father, her dedication to healing evident even when it meant treating men like the Hollisters. Over the next week, as Luke Hollister's condition stabilized and arrangements were made to transport the prisoners to Tucson for trial, Zachary found himself increasingly drawn into the daily life of Agua Caliente. Sheriff Morton, apparently taking his interest in the position for granted, began including him in his rounds, introducing him to business owners and leading citizens. To Zachary's surprise, he found himself enjoying the routine, the sense of being part of a community rather than merely passing through it. The town was indeed growing, with new construction visible on several streets and talk of the railroad's eventual arrival generating excitement among merchants. His interactions with Penelope, though limited by her duties at the clinic, grew increasingly meaningful. They shared meals when possible, walked together in the evenings when her father could spare her, and gradually, Zachary found himself sharing parts of his past that he had kept hidden for years, stories of his childhood in Ohio, his experiences in the war, the dreams he had abandoned along the way. In turn, Penelope spoke of her determination to become a physician despite the obstacles faced by women in medicine, of her years in Boston under the stern but fair guidance of her professors, of her love for the Western landscape despite its harshness. 10 days after their return to Agua Caliente, the U.S., Marshall arrived from Tucson to transport the Hollister gang's survivors to trial. As the prisoners were loaded into a reinforced wagon under heavy guard, Penelope stood beside Zachary in front of the jail, watching the proceedings. It feels like the end of something, she observed as the wagon prepared to depart. And the beginning of something else, Zachary suggested, his hand finding hers in a gesture that felt both natural and significant. Penelope's fingers intertwined with his, a silent acknowledgement of what had been growing between them. Have you decided about Sheriff Morton's offer? Zachary nodded, his decision made days ago, though he had waited for this moment to share it. I'm staying, he said simply. If you think there's a place for me here. Her smile was answer enough, but she spoke the words he needed to hear. There is, Zachary, there always has been from the moment you arrived. As the prisoner wagon pulled away, taking the Hollister threat with it, Zachary felt a chapter of his life closing the years of pursuit, of single-minded focus on bringing those men to justice. Ahead lay uncertainty, yes, but also possibility. A new purpose, a new home, and perhaps most importantly, someone to share it with. 2 days later, after formally accepting the position of sheriff-to-be, Morton would remain in office for another month to ease the transition. Zachary rode out alone to the foothills east of town. He needed time to think, to reconcile his past with the future that now lay before him. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows as he guided Thunder up a familiar trail, one he and Penelope had traveled during their pursuit of the Hollisters. The landscape was beautiful in its harsh way, rugged mountains, sparse vegetation, vast expanses of sky that seemed to go on forever. At a high point overlooking the valley where Agua Caliente nestled beside its namesake hot springs, Zachary dismounted, allowing Thunder to graze while he sat on a flat boulder, contemplating the view. The sound of approaching hoofbeats roused him from his thoughts. Turning, he was surprised to see Penelope riding toward him, her mare picking its way carefully along the rocky trail. Your father said I might find you here, she explained as she dismounted, joining him on the boulder. I hope I'm not intruding. Never, he assured her, making room beside him. I was just thinking. About, she prompted gently. Zachary gestured toward the town below. About belonging somewhere again. It's been a long time. Penelope nodded, understanding in her eyes. It can be frightening, can't it, putting down roots after so long adrift? Terrifying, he admitted with a short laugh, but also, right somehow, like I've been circling this place, this moment, without realizing it. She smiled, her hand finding his as it had that day in front of the jail. I felt the same way when I returned from Boston. As if everything I had done, everything I had learned was preparing me for this place. This purpose. They sat in companionable silence for a while, watching as the setting sun painted the landscape in shades of gold and amber. Finally, Zachary turned to face her, knowing what he needed to say. "Penelope," he began, suddenly nervous despite all they had shared. "I'm not a man of many words or elegant phrases, but I want you to know that my decision to stay here isn't just about the badge or finding a purpose after the Hollisters." Her green eyes met his, steady and encouraging. "I know, Zachary. It's about you," he continued, needing to say the words aloud. "About the possibility of us. I've spent years alone, convincing myself it was necessary for the work I did, but these past weeks with you, they've shown me what I've been missing." Penelope's expression softened, her hand tightening around his. "And what is that connection?" he said simply. "Belonging, the knowledge that someone understands why you do what you do, why it matters." He paused, gathering courage for what came next. "I'm falling in love with you, Penelope Hayes. I think I started the moment you helped me back onto my horse after the Hollisters shot me." A smile bloomed across her face, radiant in the golden light of sunset. "I believe I started falling for you at the same moment, stubborn as you were." Zachary laughed softly, remembering that first encounter. "I told you to stay away. And I told you that you should have asked me to," she reminded him, leaning closer. "I'm glad you didn't." "So am I," he murmured, closing the distance between them to kiss her gently, a promise of all that might come. The sun dipped below the horizon as they sat together on the boulder overlooking what would become their home, their future stretching before them like the vast Arizona sky full of possibility, challenge, and hope. 6 months later, Sheriff Zachary Quinn stood in the newly constructed courthouse of Agua Caliente, watching as Luke and Edward Fisher Hollister were sentenced to hang for their crimes. The trial had been moved from Tucson at the request of the territorial governor, who recognized the symbolic importance of justice being delivered in one of the communities the Hollisters had terrorized. As the judge pronounced the sentence, Zachary felt not triumph but a quiet sense of completion. The families of the Hollisters' victims were present, including his own sister who had traveled from Colorado with her children. Martha Jensen, confined to a wheelchair but alert and dignified, sat beside Penelope, their hands clasped together in solidarity. When court adjourned, Zachary made his way through the crowd to where Penelope waited, her face solemn but composed. "It's done," he said simply, offering his arm to escort her from the courthouse. "Yes," she agreed, falling into step beside him, "though the real work continues." He nodded, understanding her meaning. The capture and punishment of the Hollisters were important milestones, but they were just parts of the larger effort to build something lasting in Agua Caliente, a community governed by law rather than violence, where people could live and work in peace. Outside, the town had changed visibly in the months since Zachary had accepted the sheriff's badge. New buildings lined the main street, including the foundation of what would become Penelope's hospital, funded in part by a generous donation from a grateful mining company whose payroll the Hollisters had once attempted to steal. As they walked toward the clinic where Martha was staying during her visit, Penelope glanced at Zachary with a smile. "Have I told you today how glad I am that you stayed?" "Not in so many words," he replied, returning her smile, "but I believe you've made it clear in other ways." Their courtship had progressed steadily over the months, moving from shared walks and conversations to more formal acknowledgement of their feelings. 2 months earlier, with Dr. Hayes' blessing, Zachary had proposed, offering Penelope a simple gold ring that had once belonged to his mother. Their wedding was planned for the spring, a decision that had delighted the town and particularly Mrs. Abernathy, who had appointed herself unofficial wedding coordinator despite Penelope's protests that a simple ceremony would suffice. "Martha wants to speak with you," Penelope said as they neared the clinic. "About White River." Zachary raised an eyebrow in question. White River, where Martha had been shot, was a small settlement that had struggled since the attack, many residents having moved away out of fear. "She has ideas about establishing a medical outpost there," Penelope explained. "Something to help the community rebuild. She thinks your support as sheriff might help convince the territorial government to provide funding." "Of course," Zachary agreed immediately. "Anything she needs." As they entered the clinic, they found Martha engaged in animated conversation with Dr. Hayes, maps and papers spread across a table between them. She looked up as they entered, her intelligent eyes brightening at the sight of Zachary. "Sheriff Quinn," she greeted warmly. "I was hoping to steal a moment of your time." "He's all yours," Penelope assured her friend, moving to help her father organize the scattered papers. Martha wheeled herself to a quieter corner, gesturing for Zachary to join her. "First," she said when he was seated, "I wanted to thank you personally for capturing the men who did this." She indicated her paralyzed legs with a straightforward gesture, no self-pity in her expression. "Knowing they will face justice brings more peace than I expected." "I only wish we had caught them sooner," Zachary replied honestly, "before they hurt you or anyone else." Martha shook her head. "What's done is done. I've made my peace with this new reality." Her expression turned determined, "which is why I want to discuss White River with you." As she outlined her vision for a medical outpost that would serve not only the remaining residents of White River, but also the surrounding mining communities and nearby Apache settlements, Zachary was struck by her resilience. Like Penelope, Martha Jensen refused to be defined by tragedy, instead channeling her considerable talents toward creating something positive from her experience. "I'll write to the governor tomorrow," he promised when she had finished, "and speak with the town council about contributing to the initial costs. Agua Caliente has prospered this year. It's time we helped our neighbors do the same." Martha's smile was grateful. "Penny said you would understand. She speaks very highly of you, you know." "The feeling is mutual," Zachary assured her, glancing across the room to where Penelope bent over a medical text with her father, her face intent with concentration. "She's remarkable." "Yes, she is," Martha agreed, following his gaze, "and very much in love with you, Sheriff Quinn." "I've never seen her so happy." The simple observation warmed Zachary more than he could express. "I plan to spend my life ensuring that continues," he said quietly. That evening, after escorting Martha back to the hotel where she was staying, Zachary and Penelope walked together to the small house he had purchased on the edge of town. It was modest but well built, with a view of the mountains and enough land for a garden and perhaps, someday, room for children to play. "Will you come in?" he asked when they reached the front porch. "I have something to show you." Penelope nodded, curious, and followed him inside. The interior was still sparsely furnished. Zachary had never accumulated many possessions in his years of traveling, but comfortable, with a stone fireplace and large windows that caught the evening light. He led her to the back of the house, to a room he had previously used for storage. Opening the door, he stepped aside to let her enter first. Penelope gasped softly as she took in the transformation. The once empty room now contained a solid oak desk, bookshelves lined with medical texts, and a cabinet clearly designed to hold medical supplies. "Zachary," she breathed, turning to him with wide eyes. "What is this?" "Your office," he explained, suddenly uncertain whether he had overstepped. "I know you'll have the hospital once it's built, but I thought, for nights when you're called out or days when you might want to work from home." He trailed off, watching her expression carefully. Penelope moved slowly around the room, trailing her fingers over the desk, examining the bookshelves with their carefully selected volumes, many of which he had ordered specially from catalogs, based on titles he had seen in her father's clinic. "When did you do all this?" she asked, her voice thick with emotion. "Over the past month," he admitted. "Your father helped with the book selections, and Martha advised on the cabinet design when she arrived last week." Penelope turned to face him, tears glistening in her eyes though she was smiling. "It's perfect, Zachary. Absolutely perfect." Relief washed over him, followed by a deeper satisfaction at having pleased her so completely. "So you like it?" In answer, she crossed the room and wrapped her arms around him, burying her face against his chest. "I love it, and I love you, Zachary Quinn, more than I ever thought possible." He held her close, marveling at how completely his life had changed in the span of 6 short months. From a solitary hunter of men to a sheriff with a home, a community, and a woman who saw him for exactly who he was and loved him anyway. "I love you too, Penelope Hayes," he murmured against her hair. "Soon to be Penelope Quinn." She looked up at him, her green eyes bright with happiness and the promise of their future together. "Indeed, and I couldn't be more eager for that day to arrive." As the sun set over Agua Caliente, painting the desert in shades of purple and gold, Zachary Quinn knew with absolute certainty that he had found his place in the world, not just a geographical location, but a purpose, a belonging, a home. And all because Penelope Hayes had helped a wounded bounty hunter back onto his horse on a dusty street, refusing to stay away even when danger loomed. Sometimes, he reflected as he held the woman he loved in the house that would soon be theirs together, the most unexpected encounters led to the most perfect destinies. And for that, he would be forever grateful. The wedding of Sheriff Zachary Quinn and Dr. Penelope Hayes took place the following spring, as planned, with nearly the entire town of Agua Caliente in attendance. The ceremony was held in the newly completed town square, beneath a bower of desert wildflowers that Mrs. Abernathy had insisted upon, despite Penelope's protests that such extravagance was unnecessary. "Nonsense, dear," the hotel proprietor's wife had declared firmly. "You've patched up half the town and delivered most of its babies. The sheriff has kept us safe from outlaws and claim jumpers. If anyone deserves a proper celebration, it's you too." And so, on a perfect April morning with the desert in rare bloom after winter rains, Zachary stood beneath the flower-laden arch, watching as Penelope walked toward him on her father's arm. Her dress was simple but elegant, ivory satin that complemented her auburn hair, which she wore loose around her shoulders, adorned only with a crown of small white blossoms. Dr. Hayes placed his daughter's hand in Zachary's with a mixture of pride and wistfulness, stepping back to join Martha Jensen in the front row of assembled guests. The territorial judge, specially invited for the occasion, performed a ceremony that was brief but heartfelt, speaking of the couple's commitment not only to each other, but to the community they served. When it came time for their vows, Zachary took both of Penelope's hands in his, the words he had prepared suddenly insufficient for the depth of his feelings. "Penelope," he began, his voice steady despite the emotion that threatened to overwhelm him. "When I rode into Agua Caliente last year, I was a man with only one purpose: justice for those who had been wronged by lawless men. I never expected to find a home here, or someone who would make me want to build a life rather than just pass through." He squeezed her hands gently. "You saw beyond the bounty hunter to the man beneath. You challenged me, healed me, and showed me that there was more to life than the pursuit of retribution. I promise to love you, protect you, and walk beside you for all the days we're given together. Not as your shield, but as your partner in all things." Tears glistened in Penelope's eyes as she responded, her voice clear and unwavering. "Zachary, you came into my life like a storm, unexpected, powerful, and ultimately life-changing. In you, I found not just a man of courage and principle, but a kindred spirit who understands that true strength lies in serving others, in standing for what is right even when it's difficult." She smiled, the expression radiant with love. "I promise to love you completely, to support your dreams as you have supported mine, and to build with you a home and a life filled with purpose, compassion, and joy. Wherever the future leads us, we will face it together." The exchange of rings followed simple gold bands that symbolized their commitment. And when the judge pronounced them husband and wife, Zachary didn't hesitate to gather Penelope in his arms, kissing her with a tenderness that belied the strength of his embrace. The celebration that followed lasted well into the evening, with tables set up in the town square, music provided by local musicians, and enough food to feed twice the population of Agua Caliente. Chinese lanterns hung from newly planted trees, casting a warm glow over the festivities as darkness fell. Zachary and Penelope moved among their guests, accepting congratulations and well wishes from friends and neighbors who had, in a relatively short time, become like family to them both. "Never thought I'd see the day," Sheriff Morton commented as he clasped Zachary's hand. Now officially retired, the former lawman looked relaxed and content, the burden of responsibility lifted from his shoulders. "When you rode in half dead from that gunshot, I figured you for another drifter passing through. Shows what I know." "You knew enough to offer me your badge," Zachary reminded him with a smile. "Best decision I ever made, accepting it." "Second best," Morton corrected, nodding toward Penelope, who was deep in conversation with Martha Jensen and several other women. "That girl's the best thing that ever happened to this town and to you, Quinn." "No argument here," Zachary agreed, watching his wife with undisguised admiration. As the night progressed, guests gradually dispersed, returning to homes and hotel rooms with final calls of congratulation. Eventually, only a small group remained around a single table: Zachary and Penelope, Dr. Hayes, Martha, and the Abernathys, who insisted on seeing the celebration through to its proper conclusion. "A toast," Dr. Hayes proposed, raising his glass. "To my daughter and her husband, may your life together be long, joyful, and filled with purpose." "To Zachary and Penelope," the others echoed, glasses raised in the lantern light. Later, when they finally returned to their home now truly theirs together, Zachary paused on the porch, taking Penelope's hand before they entered. "Mrs. Quinn," he said softly, still marveling at the sound of her new name. "Are you happy?" Penelope's smile was answer enough, but she rose on tiptoe to kiss him gently. "Completely, Mr. Quinn, are you?" "More than I ever thought possible," he admitted, gathering her into his arms. "Though I still can't quite believe my good fortune." "Believe it," she whispered against his lips. "This is only the beginning." With that promise between them, they entered their home as husband and wife, ready to embark on the journey they had chosen together, a journey that had begun with an unexpected meeting on a dusty street, and would continue through all the days to come. In the years that followed, Agua Caliente continued to grow and prosper, as did the lives of Sheriff and Dr. Quinn. The hospital Penelope had envisioned became a reality, serving not only the town but surrounding communities as well. Zachary maintained order with a fair but firm hand, earning respect throughout the territory for his integrity and judgment. Their family expanded with the birth of their first child, a son they named James Hayes Quinn, followed 2 years later by a daughter, Elizabeth. Both children inherited their mother's intelligence and their father's determination, growing up in a home filled with books, lively discussions, and a deep appreciation for the community that had brought their parents together. Martha Jensen's medical outpost in White River flourished under her direction, eventually expanding into a proper clinic with the support of the territorial government. Though she never regained the ability to walk, her medical practice thrived, focusing particularly on the treatment of children and on training local women, including several from the Apache community, in basic medical care. On the 5th anniversary of their wedding, Zachary surprised Penelope with a trip to Colorado to visit his sister and her family. It was during this journey that they decided to establish a scholarship fund for young women pursuing medical training, named in honor of Martha Jensen. The initiative, funded in part by the reward money Zachary had earned for capturing the Hollisters, would eventually help dozens of women enter the medical profession. Through it all, the challenges of building a growing town, raising children, balancing professional responsibilities with family life, Zachary and Penelope remained steadfast partners, their love deepening with each passing year. And occasionally, on quiet evenings when the children were asleep and the demands of their respective duties temporarily set aside, they would sit together on their porch, watching the desert sunset and remembering how it all began. "Do you ever think about that day?" Penelope would sometimes ask, her head resting against Zachary's shoulder. "When the Hollisters shot you and left you in the street?" "Often," he would admit, his arm tightening around her, "though not because of the Hollisters." "Oh, and why do you think of it then?" She would prompt, though she knew the answer well. "Because that was the day I met you," Zachary would reply, pressing a kiss to her temple. "The day everything changed." And Penelope would smile, remembering the wounded, stubborn man who had told her she should have stayed away, and how she had known even then that her place was at his side. "You should have asked me to," she would remind him softly. "The best mistake I never made," he would agree, grateful beyond words for her refusal to be warned away, a refusal that had led them to a life neither could have imagined on that dusty street in Agua Caliente so many years before. A life built on courage, compassion, and the enduring power of love to transform even the most solitary of hearts.